one of the biggest barriers for wine is feeling like you don't have the education to make the right choice, or feeling concerned that you'll look silly if you don't do the right thing or you don't pair it with the right thing. And we've stripped all of that back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Marketing Matters on the Wharton Podcast Network, our weekly podcast where we analyze the latest in advertising, marketing, customer behavior, branding, retailing, new product launches, everything marketing. I'm Barbara Kahn, the Patty and J.H. Baker Professor of Marketing, and today we're speaking with Conley Downing, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Archer Roose Wines. And that is an interesting company which offers globally sourced premium wine in recyclable single-serve cans. Now that's unusual, canned wine. That's not what you think about when you think about wine. So I'm really interested in how this brand came about, how it developed a distinctive voice. It's partnering with Elizabeth Banks. That's pretty interesting. So there's really a lot to talk about. Conley, welcome to Marketing Matters.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So let's start with the obvious question. Canned wine?
I know. But I really believe that in 5 to 10 years, nobody will bat an eye at it, much like screw caps now. If you think about when screw caps first came out in the wine category, people were totally flabbergasted by that concept. And now nobody even thinks twice about it. But the way that this brand came about was that our co-founder, Marion, was busy, young, working professional and traveling a ton. And it was a Tuesday night and she wanted a great glass of wine, just the glass. She didn't want to open the full bottle and have to either waste it because she was about to go on a business trip or finish it and start the business trip off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
So it occurred
to the bigger error.
Yeah. That could be a bigger problem. So it occurred to her that the best solution would be to find what is really the right format to allow for that single serve pour that is not just convenient, but is truly a replacement pour because the quality matches that of a bottle. And
so let me just stop you there, because what's interesting is a lot of times you hear like this can, like water being in cans was an environmental play. Yeah. And maybe that's true here, I don't know. But that wasn't the motivation for this. It really was more about single serve.
Yeah, and we often say that we're not a format solution, we're a behavior solution. That happens to come in a great format. So it really is about meeting that unmet need, which is people just wanting a glass of wine.
So that's interesting, because I was going to ask you, like, there is a trend on this non-alcoholic trend, but even the non-alcoholic trend, for many people, it's not about not drinking at all. Correct. It's about drinking sometimes alcohol, sometimes not. And I could see how the single serve is actually even a part of that.
Yeah, we talk a lot about zebra striping, and 94% of consumers that drink non-alc also drink alcohol. They're just looking to better moderate their serve. So that is the perfect solution. In fact, we've done some interesting cross-merchandise programs with non-alc brands because we love the idea that we can sit alongside a can of a ready-to-drink non-alc, and you can choose based on where you are in the day or the evening or the week or the month, what you really want.
So that's interesting, because there is a huge growth in this cocktail market. They came out with a lot of these canned drinks and the hard iced tea and hard lemonade and all of those. It's a huge growth. It's explosion, but it kind of passed wine by. I think, it's kind of interesting that wine wasn't in that until you guys came along, I guess.
So what's interesting, Barbara, is actually there sort of was, and this was an education that I received when I joined Archer Roose Wines, because I had been in spirits for quite some time before and not as familiar with the wine category. And what Marion educated me on is that there was actually a first wave of canned wine that hit retail during and around COVID, and it never took off because there are actually a lot of quality barriers that exist when you're canning wine. And those were not taken into consideration during that first wave. But what Marion and the rest of our incredible operations team have done is really built out these standard practices to ensure that the quality is optimally developed to exist with the can liners and the can environment. And so it's not as simple as it may seem. You cannot just put bulk wine in a can and sell it. It has to really be thoughtfully constructed from a chemistry perspective, things that are well beyond my sort of bank of knowledge. But that quality piece is so critical. And that's something we really talk a lot about because that's the primary barrier to overcome.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that's a really heavy duty perception change. and people aren't paying that much attention to you. So, like, how do you change those perceptions?
Yeah, so we rely pretty heavily on our awards and accolades, but also we want to own consumers' first taste of canned wine. We understand that if their first experience with canned wine is a negative one, they're never going to come back to the category. So it's so important to us that we get out and sample consumers at every possible opportunity. And we achieve that through retail demos. We achieve that by sampling in our on-premise accounts, our restaurants and bars, and then at a ton of hyperlocal events. So Archer Roose Wines is out at your local food and wine festivals, your local barbecue festivals, at breweries all over this country. Exposing people to their first taste of canned wine. And the only other big piece that I would say is we have a pretty significant footprint in the travel channel right now. So we're on JetBlue, we are on Breeze Airways, and we're on Princess Cruises. And so over 10 million travelers annually are exposed to Archer Roose wines on, their favorite flight or on a cruise. And that's an incredible opportunity for us to reach people, generate awareness for canned wine, and show how the format fits into their lifestyle.
That's interesting. So because a lot in the spirits, you said you were in the spirits business before, is about building a very big brand. I mean, Super Bowl advertising is a lot about beer advertising and things like that. But what you're suggesting is because this is an experiential product and changing the perceptions really has to come from changing the experiences with drinking wine, the marketing strategy sounds radically different then.
It is. It is. And let's face it, we're a startup in a constrained environment. And so we have to be incredibly intelligent and mindful about how we spend every penny that comes through our door. And the best way to do that is not a huge paid ad campaign because we don't have full distribution nationwide. We are nationally distributed, but we have 80% of our distribution is in the on-premise at restaurants and bars.
80%. Wow.
Yeah. So as we continue to grow that physical availability at retail, it's more important for us to make sure that people try and love and are asking for Archer Roose wines at the places that they buy their wine and spirits.
So that's interesting. That's very interesting. It's an interesting marketing challenge. There's a couple things about it that strike me. One, unlike some of the spirits, which you were talking about, and even beer, I don't necessarily think of wine as a brand first category. I think of it more like maybe country or type of grape or that kind of stuff. Whereas with beer, I do think of it as brand first. Yeah. So how do you make sure they remember the brand? Clearly that's going to be important to you instead of just this idea of canned wine and then they may not choose yours the next time they go.
I'm so glad you asked that question because we purposefully have a real brand that is built around a unique character named Archer Roose who travels the world on her moose, seeking out the best winemaking regions across the globe. And so there is really an identity around the brand and the iconography that sits on each of our cans, which features this distinctive moose that completely stands out against a backdrop of, to your point, varietals and appellations and geographies. So it was just very intentionally created by Marion to be that way. And people will often say, oh, you're the moose, you're the, and people always want to know the story of Archer Roose and how it came to be. So it was intentionally meant to be a disruptor in the category and really challenge the way that wine brands and wine businesses are built.
Well, that's where Roose Moose, I guess that comes. Yeah. No, it's like Geico the gecko or whatever, and you have to give them something to remember it. Yeah. And it's interesting. I like the way you call it. It's kind of a category buster, like the way Liquid Death was, say, for water. Thinking about a brand, because there were brands in water, I guess, before, but Liquid Death really kind of challenged that idea. And you're doing that now in wine. And when you do that, you've got to have, in Liquid Death's case, I don't know if you make these comparisons, but it's really an out-of-the-box kind of crazy brand. Yeah. And what you're talking about is creating a new identity for the wine brand here, which is, I guess, from what you're saying, whimsical and things like that.
Very whimsical. And, Elizabeth Banks joining the brand in 2021 was a perfect fit because she's got this very irreverent, but still optimistic kind of energy to her comedy and to her business and her personality. And she's really helped to infuse a lot of that into the brand. And we don't take ourselves too seriously. One of the biggest barriers for wine is feeling like you don't have the education to make the right choice or feeling concerned that you'll look silly if you don't do the right thing or you don't pair pair it with the right thing. And we've stripped all of that back. We do not lead with education, but with that said, we're very transparent. On the back of every single one of our cans, you can read about the people, places, and practices that went into that wine. We're the first in the category to list our ingredients on each can.
Wow.
You can see our nutrition facts on our website.
You're kidding?
Yeah,
That's really funny.
yeah. So it's like we want you to have the information because we stand behind the quality of our wine, but we're not going to lead with that from a storytelling perspective.
Well, that's fair. So how did the Elizabeth Banks thing come about? I mean, it sounds like she is the perfect match, but was that luck, kismet?
Well, Marion, again, our co-founder, has been a big fan of Elizabeth Banks. And in thinking about, this was, remember, back in 2020, a lot of brands were kind of jumping on the celebrity bandwagon. And so people were asking all founders in this business, I think, like, oh, are you going to bring on a celebrity? And she was like, no, I don't really want it. The only way I would do that is if it was somebody that was just absolutely perfect. And for her, that Elizabeth Banks. And so she was able to make that connection, and Elizabeth instantly fell in love with the brand. She totally understood it. She tells the story of that it was COVID and she's got a place in Utah and she was in a river floating down on a floaty and she had the can in her little cooler. And she was like, I just get it. And Elizabeth's cool because she's not stuffy. There's no ego there. She's very down to earth and she likes things that are just kind of the people. So she really understood the premise of it and wanted to be a part of helping to build the brand.
And she's a co-owner. She's not just a celebrity endorser.
Correct.
So that must change things, right?
Yes. And we also, she's our chief creative officer as well. So she actually plays a very active role. We'll, ping pong ideas very frequently. She'll come to us with great ideas. She's obviously got a very busy career as well, but she is incredible about making time to really prioritize the brand and those moments in culture that can help us continue to gain awareness and visibility.
So one of the other things that I've noticed in some of these, category breakers, like Athletic is another one in non-alcoholic beer, they partnered pretty early on with Whole Foods and kind of went through a distribution strategy as well as clearly a very aggressive advertising strategy. So how important, I mean, you already talked a little bit about like the travel industry, but what's your channel and distribution partnership and strategy?
I mean, look, coming from the spirits industry, the common split between on-premise restaurants and bars and off-premise is 20-80. So 80% of your volume is typically sourced from retail. When I was interviewing for this role, Marion told me, oh, we're 80% on-premise, 20% off. And I just assumed she had inverted the numbers. And I was like, oh, do you mean the other way around? And she's like, no, that's the model. And it's intentional because, again, of that conception that people have, or misconception, I should say, that canned wine can't be as good as wine in a bottle. And so the ability to try it before you're buying a 4-pack, it's a lower barrier from a cost perspective. You can try a can of wine for, whatever it is at your local account. Maybe it's $9 or something like that versus investing in a 4-pack. It is a better value proposition. And so once people try it, then they convert to buy it. And we see 67% of our DTC purchasers are repeat purchasers.
So it's DTC. You're not working. It's pretty much DTC.
Both, but that's just a nice proof point. If you look at it on the wholesale channel, about 81% of our accounts are reordering within 90 days. So we have both kind of sides of that coin. Really, our priority is not DTC. DTC is great for data gathering, message testing, things of that nature, but we're really driving our business in the wholesale channel. And then travel's a great sort of awareness place as well.
But have you done with any like a Whole Food strategy or any kind of supermarket? Are you going to do anything?
We do have an incredible alignment with Sprouts. And so we are in Sprouts nationally. They've been a great partner of ours. We have been activating programming with them. And by programming, I mean in-store displays, point of purchase, point of sale. And what I was mentioning at the top of this call with the cross-merch program with a non-alc brand was just this past February. It was a program that we called Choose Your Chill. And again, that was all about zebra striping the ability to have alcohol or not have alcohol at your event or at your home or whatever. And so that program led to a 38% same store lift during that program window. And we continue to innovate and find ways to creatively get wine actually out of the wine aisle, because we find that secondary visibility opportunity is what really stops people in their tracks and gets them to think like, oh, how could this fit into my life? Whereas if you see it amongst a bunch of 750 ml bottles, you might kind of miss it or gloss over it. So those opportunities to drive display are really critical for us at retail.
Yeah, if you put it all together, it must be a really fun marketing job. I mean, because what was your background? You said you were in spiritual at Diageo.
I was at Diageo for several years. I actually started on the agency side. I spent a lot of years on the agency side. I worked on Novartis Consumer Health, GasX, X-Lax, Benefiber, digestive products. But I had two clients while I was on the agency side that were in the Bev-Alc arena. I had Pernod Ricard, and I managed their wine and champagne portfolio. And then I had Diageo, and I oversaw their customer marketing and their vodka and rum portfolios. I also worked on HP's global packaging strategy. I worked on the launch of the Chase Sapphire card. So I worked across a variety of different categories, which was something I really did intentionally because I didn't want to kind of just be exposed to one thing. But I really love this category. And when I had an opportunity to then go in-house at Diageo, I jumped at it. I spent the first couple of years working on the shopper marketing team overseeing the grocery channel. And then from there, I led two brands, which were Ciroc Vodka and De Leon Tequila on the brand side. Wow. But this past 6 years, I've been at startups. This is my first wine on the brand side. I led a tequila prior to its acquisition by Diageo. I worked on another tequila brand that's now a part of a joint venture with Diageo. And then I worked at essentially a venture, like a fund that was investing in minority-owned spirits brands.
Wow, that's a pretty nice background in a fun category because marketing matters so much in all of these categories. And exactly. So you have this longitudinal history. Can you make like some big points, like for people thinking about marketing, how it's changed? Because it sounds like when you're talking about those campaigns and you're talking about what you're doing today, it really does sound like a different way of thinking about marketing, maybe even measuring marketing. And I mean, do you have some big takeaways like that on that?
I think the biggest takeaway is just that you can't follow the same playbook ever. Like I rewrite the playbook for every brand, every year. You can't rinse and repeat. Something that worked on one brand last year will not work on this brand this year. And so that's why I love my job because I'm constantly building and rebuilding and approaching things in a new way. Consumer tastes shift. One of the things that I feel like I learned on the agency side was that everything has to lean on and start with the consumer insight. What do we know about people and their behaviors and their attitudes about this particular product or category that we can really lean into in order to gain that space within their hearts or their minds or their wallets, ideally all three. And that's really what drives me every day. And things like moderation that are now so paramount for consumers didn't matter 5 years ago. So it's really all about, and it's interesting, I actually just completed a course that really reminded me about that. It's not about us. It's about consumers and it's about how we serve their needs.
But it's interesting because I hear what you're saying and yet I hear something else. So what you're saying from the consumer insight point of view is the behavior change. And people are, like you said, the zebra, moderating behavior, single serve, all of those are definitely consumer insights. But they're all about behavior. And then what you're saying is what differentiates your product is this brand identity, creating this personality, and creating a collaboration with an actress, and that kind of stuff, which is more in a way product focused. And so do you see what I mean? How do you match what the identity creation is with your customer insights?
I do. It's been a bit of an evolution, to be honest with you. And when I first joined the brand, there was a headline that was existing on a lot of point of sale that was, "When fancy meets schmancy." And, it was fun. It was lighthearted. It caught people's attention. But did it say anything really about us? Did it help explain the product at all? No. So, they saw Elizabeth Banks. They saw this headline. Oh, that's cute. But they didn't really know what we were, what we stood for, or the moment that we were seeking to fill with them. So, flash forward, here we are now. We lead with, in a retail environment, when you just want a glass. And then we've got fun visuals that show the more lighthearted side of wine. So it's Elizabeth on a patio with a paper napkin, just kind of feet up, relaxing. So it's really about finding that balance. And quite honestly, we're always working on that. There's this thing where We did a full year messaging attribution analysis based on the ads that we ran and the copy that we put forth in our own channels, so our email, our social media, et cetera. And what we learned was that the thing that attracts people is that behavioral moment, that ability to give somebody the permission to just have a glass of wine. So not about moderating in a deprivation way, but more about moderating, like, now you can just have a glass of wine. But then what actually closed the deal was showing the convenience and the quality. So they have to coexist.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, like, what about growth? I mean, are you going to do other products? How many different wines do you have anyway? How big is your
Great
portfolio?
question. We have a pretty expansive portfolio at this point. We've got 8 varietals. We launched our Pinot Noir last year, and this year we launched a Chardonnay. So we've had 2 innovations in the last 2 years. And we are going to be launching something which I can't announce yet, but next year, which is a really exciting, I would call it a bit of a line extension for the brand. So there are some exciting things on the horizon. But as of right now, we're a globally sourced wine portfolio. And, as I mentioned earlier, what's I think really interesting is that we work directly with winemakers in each of these different regions that best suit the varietal that we're seeking to create. So we have wines from Friuli, Italy. We have wines from, Pays d'Oc, France. We've got a wine from Australia, from Chile, from Mendoza, Argentina. So they're really everywhere. And if you look, on each can, it tells you who the winemaker is, a bit about their background, and again, how it's made, what makes that place and that individual kind of interesting and relevant to your.
That does sound fancy schmancy.
It is, but all in a very approachable way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such an interesting idea. I mean, and like with these other kinds of things, once people get used to it, it'll be so common, that
Right.
likely you'll be copied, frankly, and then you'll see a lot of, and then you have to make sure that you really establish this brand and this brand loyalty.
That's right. And the nice thing is we're already starting to see that happening. I was actually doing a tour of a facility yesterday with one of our partners, and I saw some canned wines from a brand, and I was like, oh, they're launching canned wines. How exciting. And we really are excited. We want to grow this category, and we want to make sure that the other players that enter the category are taking their quality as seriously as we are, so that consumers have a great experience and continue to buy. So we've actually published quite a bit of the research that we've done. We partnered with Cornell University and published a research paper on how the sulfites interact with the can chemistry. And so we've shared that all open source. And the intent is that everybody has access to this information so that we can ensure that never again does anybody have a bad experience with canned wine.
I'm just going to ask this because we ask this all the time, but I think in your category, it's probably less relevant right now. We started out I was telling you, I've been fighting with ChatGPT for the last few days. So I'm really pissed at AI in general. But it doesn't sound like it's as important to you because you're like having the consideration start on premise in the experience in travel. It's not really people going online and asking ChatGPT which wine to drink. It's probably not what the consumer decision-making process is. But does AI play a role here?
Yeah, it's not our core focus, but you better believe I test it all the time. I'll say, what's the best wine for a picnic, Chatty G? And if I don't get our wine back as a result, that makes me question what we're doing. And, so much of that is informed by earned media. And we have had a pretty great track record of showing up in a lot of thought leadership pieces and different publications just on the earned side about how we fit into various moments throughout the calendar year. And so that's been really useful. And we do actually perform quite well on agentic as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is the way it would be searched then. I'm going somewhere. I only want to drink one. Is there? What would be and so you have to be situational. So your strategy right now is trial by error. You just go in and see if you come up and then.
I'm a very curious person. So I'm constantly just trying to put myself in the shoes of a consumer and think about how would I be approaching this situation and what would I see if I were to be asking these questions or if I were to show up in this place and how much do things cost and what's the value proposition. So I'm just constantly trying to figure out what are the white spaces that we're not showing up in and then how can we place ourselves there.
And then what you said is you then have to be present in Reddit discussions or social media or something in order for these agents to pick yourself up.
That's right. That's right. And we're very lucky. Interestingly enough, the travel channel is the one that most consistently gets posted by passengers, by travelers. They're constantly posting themselves on JetBlue with their cans. They're like, vacation starts now with a can of Archer Roose. And so a lot of our consumers are doing some great work on our behalf, and we appreciate it.
Oh, that makes total sense. Yeah, it's well, I love talking to you about this. It's a really innovative, different way to think about marketing, to think about the product, to think about spirits, even to think about moderation. So that's really wonderful. If people want to find out more about your brand, where should they go? Do you have a robust online presence, or is it social media?
Absolutely. They can visit us at archerroose.com, and then they can visit us on Instagram, Archer Roose Wines. We're just launching our TikTok. We've got our marketing intern success story, who is spearheading the Gen Z efforts. And so we're going to be doing some really fun stuff coming up on TikTok. But yeah, they can find us on all the usual social and website.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank our producer, Jacob Grodnick and Marissa Renna. And thank you all for listening today. And we'll be back soon. Till then, this has been Marketing Matters on the Wharton Podcast Network. I'm Barbara Kahn.